So this is a romp through Scotland, an introduction to the involvement the Inland Waterways Association has got, and I think we'll just crack on with it. Right, it's a talk in three sections. The first really is going to introduce you to Scotland and its canals. The second looks at where things went a wee bit wrong. Many of you will have heard that an awful lot of bridges got closed and everything ground to a halt on the lowland canals. And the third section is a look at possible ways forward. I have to make a lot of apologies to start with. This is not my native abode at all. I'm not used to giving talks. I'm not a committee man. I'm really rather new to this, so my apologies in advance. I'm also a complete fraud because many people in the IWA have been there for a great number of decades, worked so hard to achieve what we've got now in terms of restored canals, whereas I've just wandered in very recently. These are the sort of activities that I admire most, where the Waterways Recovery Group gets stuck in, and in this case they're doing some work on the canal for the Cotswold Canal Trust. Beautiful workmanship, it really is phenomenal. So we're looking at a very skilled force of volunteers here, and I admire them greatly. I just do words. Some of the words found their way into the books that I write. We're looking at, well, self-discovery or waterway recovery. I've described them in the past as the doyens of dirty digging, formed with the express purpose of resurrecting fallen waterways. And there are an awful lot of navigations, I say, that have benefited from their unstinting ability to mix endeavour with cheerfulness, pleasure with muck, and, of course, sand with cement. My way into the waterways some 40 years ago was a combination of the MSC, and before those people in the Manchester area get excited and think of the Manchester Ship Canal, it was in fact the Manpower Service Commission, and a very fine goat curry. We'll shorthand that by saying that I had a load of students that needed to understand how life worked outside of the actual skills they were doing, which was land-based industries. And for some reason, it struck me that if we stuck them all on a narrowboat, set them loose for a week in an environment that they were totally unfamiliar with, it would actually cover all these personal development skills that the Manpower Service Commission required us to cover. The goat curry, well, a few years later, my brother invited me to a wee pothouse bob, where he knew that David Perrott, the erstwhile editor of the Nicholson Waterways Guides that I'm now involved with, would be. He knew David was a little, how should we put it, getting a little lonely really, doing job all by himself. And to cut a long story short, we bonded, David and I, over the goat curry. And for 30 years, I've now been involved with the Waterways Guides. Right, so I live in Scotland. I'm the IWA Navigation Committee represented along with my boss, Richard Davis. Top left-hand picture is Bowling, which is just at the western end of the Forth and Clyde Canal. Beautiful, beautiful mooring, stuck under a great big hill that's towering up beyond it. Occasionally I go, as I have at the moment, and lurk over towards Edinburgh on the Union Canal, tied up outside Organic Market Garden. And all the work I do on the Nicholson Guides gets done out of a back cabin. So let's look at the canals themselves. Enough of me. They divide neatly into the Highland canals, of which the Crinan is 9 miles and the Caledonian is 58, and the Lowland canals, Union Canal 32 miles and the Forth and Clyde Canal 37 miles. So pretty well half and half between the Highland and Lowland. And then we've got the Monkland Canal lurking in the lowlands to the east of Glasgow, very much remaindered, whereas you can see the profile of it in some places and a few sections are in water. It will never be navigated again. Let's start at the top left-hand corner of the map. in the northwest. With the Crinan Canal, 9 mile in the navigation, and it was dug to save 130 miles of boating around the Mull of Kintyre and all its associated storms and dangers. And it's navigation with 15 locks on it. The lighthouse that you saw in the first slide is Adrishig Harbour, where the Crinan Canal enters Loch Fyne. And I'm always amazed how busy it is a waterway during the season. You can easily on a day find 30 plus blue water boats transiting. It's self-operation, unless you want to pay for a pilot, or as we call them this side of the border, a hobbler, and they will help you through by operating the locks, etc. It sits, the lock you're looking at there, sits beside a very important commercial quay. And this is my first awareness of IWA's involvement in Scotland. When that started subsiding, falling into Loch Fyne, and threatening the livelihood of the local community in Adrishig, who rely on timber extraction and then exporting timber from that pier. And it appeared that Scottish Canals, and I guess by default Scottish Canals, were quite happy to let it fall down. So very timely involvement with the IWA, and people changed their minds quickly and did the work that was needed to secure the pier you see now. There are the two in juxtaposition, leisure on the right, commercial on the left. It's a very slick operation. JST just wander around Scotland with everything from cranes to mobile wharfs to anything you need really to load timber from remote places onto seagoing vessels. Here's a boat that came in when I was last up there, ready to load. As I say, it's a slick operation. They don't mess around. It's quite a big boat to come up a sea lock. And you just got a continuous, when I was there, succession of lorries, one after the other, just being unloaded. And that boat managed to turn round on a tide, which was absolutely phenomenal. Just cracking away, loading it. The crew managed to occupy themselves quite profitably. And judging by the bend in his rod, I think he managed to catch his lunch, supper, tea, whatever it was. Just beyond where he's fishing, sorry, we'll come back to the minute as you were. Here we are, the leisure side, boat going in at low tide into Adrishig Sea Lock. As you can see, it's scenic. That would be an understatement. Unfortunately, along with the scenic goes a bit of rot. And if you look carefully at the gates there, they are way past their sell-by date. Here we have, as I mentioned, just beyond the man doing his fishing, the egg shed, brand new, just been opened. It's to be a museum. And it poses a question that was posed certainly back at the World Canal Festival in 2016. Is Scottish Canals a navigation authority or a regeneration agency? Sometimes it was very difficult to tell, and it's a theme that recurs and we'll come back to again. So climbing up now from Adrishig on the Crinan Canal, this is Lock 6. We've got 8 to go until we get onto the Summit Pound. And it became apparent last summer that it wasn't only the sea lock that was in a dark condition, it was all 8 locks. And there was considerable concern here that the canal would be closed. Along its way, there's some lovely cottages, which in fact are income generators for Scottish Canals. They are rented out. Unfortunately, the agency that was renting them out has gone into liquidation. At the moment, Scottish Canals don't hold the keys, but it's hopeful that will be put right next year. Unique bridge, lovely, lovely piece of heritage there, Denali Bridge. Yeah, absolutely unique. You can probably work out that it's wound back along its rails to allow boats to pass through the lock. Unfortunately, that notice has been there at least since 2015. And we need a cunning plan, basically, to put it right. It has been suggested I go up there with a living van and live there and repair it. That was one of the director's suggestions when I complained about how long that had been in that condition. As a boater and boating on those canals, RYAS, Royal Yacht Association of Scotland, the Cruising and General Purposes Committee and the Inland Navigation Panel are working very much in parallel with IWA. So we're not alone, but that was one of the significant members of this committee writing to the chief exec last summer, pointing out that the canal basically was not fit for purpose and what was going to be done about it. It's a canal that relies on quite a few commercial ventures. If they can't get through, they don't earn money, they're not best pleased. Probably the best known commercial venture there is Vic 32, preserved puffer. Beautiful boat. On a weekly basis, she takes paying passengers out into the area around Loch Crinan and beyond. And that is actually Crinan Harbour itself, where they're coming back from one of her trips. As I say, timber is important. Timber is very much the lifeblood of the local economy of the Highlands. And they will just rock up, establish themselves with a mobile pier and a crane. And in all parts of the Highlands, you'll find them with either a big boat like the one at the bottom, loading with logs, or a tug and a raft, whatever really best fits the situation. Right, onto the Calais, which is effectively 1/3 a canal and 2/3 lochs. Here we are looking roughly in the middle there, looking west, southwest down Loch Oich. You get some idea of the size of vessels that can come through the Calais. There's an even bigger vessel that can get through the Calais. Normally she's carrying logs, she's a JST boat. In this case it looks it's either sand or sawdust she's moving. Again, important for the commercial ventures on the Calais. Here we've got 2 trip boats. So it's beholden really on Scottish Canals to maintain these canals, not just for leisure and pleasure, but for the commercial ventures that rely totally on them to make an income. Another example of an income, a floating activity centre on a rather tasty Dutch barge at Lagan Locks. I'd like to tell you that's an example of Scottish Canals' poor maintenance, but it's very redundant now, although it's rather attractive. So you're at Fort Augustus there, roughly in the middle of the Calais. Looking to Loch Ness, all 22 miles of it, and the fact there's a 22-mile fetch there means that narrowboats are not allowed to navigate the Calais. It is a simply stunning waterway. It was the last waterway that I actually met. I like to think I kept the best till last. Fort Augustus would not be complete without a mock-up of Nessie and a piper. Kittraloch, one of the challenges that Scottish Canals are currently dealing with. There are large voids behind the lock chambers, which means that they've had to spend a lot of money this winter dealing with that. But I would say, as far as the Calais goes, I would just mortgage the house if you have to live in a van. But yes, it is definitely a waterway to save up. And even if you have to hire Tupperware, it's still well worth spending at least a week on there. It's totally stunning. One end, that's the Fort William end. We've got a steam locomotive that in the height of the summer will travel there and back twice a day out to Mallaig. So a swing bridge across the canal. That's Corpac, just at Fort William. And the other end, Cracknahary, is another bridge with a different railway on. And when things were bad in the Lowland canals, we had 6 bridges out of action at one stage. We heard of an interesting story where we thought we had competition from the Highland canals. We thought we'd heard of failure number 7 because the bridge could no longer be swung because the key had been dropped into the canal. About to slate Scottish canals on that, only to learn to our chagrin that in fact it is Network Rail that operates the bridge and had dropped the key into the canal. Right, on to the Union Canal. Not really meant to be a shot of my breakfast. It is in fact the only picture I've got of the sign that says Union Canal. Leamington Lift Bridge, unique again, fascinating bridge. Failed last year, it was one of the 6 that failed. Something in the region of £375,000 has had to be spent on it to get it going again. But it's well worth every penny of it. As we go along the Union Canal, we are reminded that it's 32 odd miles of lock-free waterway. A lot of sections are into side cuts, and there are areas, this is Linlithgow, there are areas where there have been some very dubious embankments, all of which Scottish Canals, to give them their credit, have now dealt with at obviously large expense. This is the last bit of work that was done, because it did look as though the canal was wanting to empty into a farmer's field and head towards the railway. And 32 miles of water in there would not have been very satisfactory. So again, the money is now being spent. It's a charming canal. It has some charming people on it, some charming boats. This is the veg boat from the organic market garden I'm tied up alongside at the moment. Those of you who know the pig place on the Oxford Canal in England, the market garden is very similar. It doesn't do pigs, it just does vegetables. But we have a canal that should be 3'6" deep. If we can find 3 foot, we're lucky. And it's known to be filling up an inch per year with silt just washed out of farmers' fields. That doesn't help very much, having reed bergs floating around. But again, it is hopefully there'll be a capital sum available to do some serious dredging. That Union Canal at its western end joins the Forth and Clyde Canal via the Falkirk Wheel, which I think everybody's heard of. Just in passing, we'll remark on some gondola theft. This was another occasion the IWA got involved. Someone had the bright idea that one of the gondolas could have a static pod put in it and that they could earn money by rotating with people just standing in the pod for the experience rather than going on the garish orange thing you'll see, which is one of the trip boats. Well, you only had to sit there actually, as I did one Saturday, count the number of hire boats that were going out and the leisure boats that were going through the wheel. Most of the hire boats tend to go on the wheel to start with and head off to Edinburgh. And it was quite clear there was not going to be anything like enough capacity with a fixed pod. And the last time I went through there, we wouldn't have made it if if Scottish Canals had put a pod in the way. So that was a very effective campaign by the IWA to get rid of what is just a piece of nonsense, to be quite truthful. So, Forth and Clyde, here we're on the eastern end, just heading down towards the Kelpies. I'm really showing these slides to say that basically the locks are not in the best of condition on either end of the Forth and Clyde. Here's a balloon sill that's undergoing repair a couple of years ago. It's worth noting that an awful lot of input in terms of operation, maintenance, etc. on the lowland canals are from voluntary groups. Reunion have a contract to, and there's some of their illustrious lads, to operate the locks. So the locks running down from Falkirk Wheel 16 to 2, which is at the Kelpies, are all operated under contract by Reunion, which is a social enterprise that get you into work scheme, an awful lot of really good and positive things that come out of it. Amongst other things, they have a day boat, Jaggy Thistle, and they are based on Lochrin Bell, the wee boat you see up in the top corner, courtesy of TripAdvisor, and they rent that out for other social enterprises, to charities. It really earns its keep. As you can see, things are fairly rough. And when a hire boater last year managed to put his boat into full ahead entering a lock, he managed to take a lock gate out. So new gates in there, but it doesn't need much more than a good bang on some of them for them to feel somewhat threatened. A great ambassador to lowland canals, particularly on the Forth and Clyde, Wee Spark. It's a third scale replica of a Clyde puffer built by Jimmy, you'll see there. He's a heating engineer, built in his workshop in about 2002, out of scrap from a local shipyard. But he is an amazing ambassador for the canals. We had, as I've mentioned earlier, problems with closed bridges. They became non-operational. And when we finally got them open again, we parted, as only the Scots know how. And here's the other bridge that misbehaved and failed, again being opened here by MSP. When we party, we generally invite everyone along too, and the first people to turn up are usually the steamboats. It wouldn't be a party without a piper, and those of you that are eagle-eyed will notice that the poor lad got persuaded to go and stand on a wee platform on the Falkirk wheel. It may be that you don't know actually who the chief exec, who the person responsible for the show up here is. Two people. Is it the fellow on the left or the lass on the right? In fact, it's Catherine Topley. The fellow on the left is Michael Matheson, Cabinet Secretary for Transport and Infrastructure and Connectivity. So it's Catherine's job really to run the show up here. And been doing it for about 2 years now and making an excellent job. Typical of a Forth and Clyde bridge, we're now down the western end, are these Basco bridges. And again, they were troublesome and helped to close the canal. Interesting mechanism, requires a person each side to operate them, and they are operated by Scottish Canals personnel, regarded as being too dangerous for boaters to operate. So say we're on the western end now, and things are considerably worse than the eastern end. A lot of money needs to be spent to sort out locks like this, Lock 32, Boghouse Lock. It just holds enough water, not quite as much comes out as goes in, but serious work is required. And of course, it's worth just pointing out that that Scots do navvying, Scots restore canals, and in the mid-70s, the lowland canals were totally closed down. There are pictures of people digging them out as a contrast to the happy gang on the left of Wergies. It is a transit canal. The restoration cost, turn of the millennium, was £100,000. Sorry, 100,000 million. I'll try again. 100,000 million pounds. They wanted another 18 million more to do the job properly. So we actually started off with a deficit, which explains some of the problems that you've just seen. There was not sufficient money to do the job as well as everyone would have liked to have done it. Going on to now the very west end of the canal, that's the sea lock that takes the Forth and Clyde Canal out into the River Clyde and then doing the Watter. Talking of the millennium and the projected sort of numbers, it was hoped that something in the region of 600 or more boats would be attracted to the lowland canals when they're open. Sadly, rather less than half that number actually are on the lowland canals at the moment, and something really does need to be done about encouraging a greater uptake of boating here. Scottish Canals in the past were very known for their vanity projects. which didn't do a lot to make up boat numbers. Here's a very tasty Dutch barge, which they went on to rent out, having spent a vast sum of money on it. I'm not going to embarrass anyone by giving you an idea of the sum of money, but it certainly never washed its face in terms of the return it's making. Right, so you can see there, it's a bit of a mixed bag. You've got lovely waterways, fantastic scenery, but also there are problems. And various people are getting involved and have got involved to address these problems. So let's just have a look at some of the examples of this. When things started to go wrong about 5 years ago, it was over mooring fees. And one very enterprising person established a boaters group. Someone who worked full time, he maintains boats on the canal, and in his spare time worked his socks off establishing this boaters group. And that was really the initial campaigning body on the lowland canals. It's not something that he could sustain on his own indefinitely. So we cast round for ways in which we might make this a more substantial group. And I actually went down to HQ, IWA HQ, to try and persuade Neil and his merry men and women that he would like to have another branch up in Scotland, a Scottish IWA branch. For various reasons, that one didn't fly. Good reasons, but it didn't fly. And ultimately, a local organisation established itself, local in the sense that it was non-IWA, called the Lowland Canals Association. And they are doing a great job, really, on the sort of housekeeping level. Examples of which are, in the current climate of a pandemic, they're the people that go and operate the pump outs and diesel and that sort of thing for boaters, because for Scottish Canals personnel or furloughed. They're the people that try and establish whether boaters have got financial hardship and will actually supply money, food, whatever is required. And they also, under less demanding circumstances, negotiate and liaise with Scottish Canals over the navigation itself and details along the navigation, where dredging is required, that sort of thing. Keep Canals Alive was a campaigning body we set up in response to the bridges being closed. It gives you an example there, if we look at the logos, of all the different volunteering bodies there are along the lowland canals, and have put so much time and effort into it there. Yeah, a very diverse body indeed. What you might notice was the IWA are lacking there. And so we thought we need to do something about that. That is the Opera building in Glasgow. We invited Ivor to come up, who was then the chairman, and see whether the IWA would be interested in getting involved. They didn't want us to be a Scottish branch, but we could see that some more campaigning zeal, which they'd already demonstrated, was very much the order of the day. So, on a very dour Scottish winter night in that extremely dour building, we sat round a table. I remember guttering candles, but I think I'm imagining it. I just think the lighting was perhaps very poor. So Ivor came and he listened to us and he saw what we looked like and he went away again. And there was a silence for several months and we thought, have we upset him? Have we offended him? Did the IWA want to help us? And then look, we were able to modify, this is actually the letter heading on all the KCA, the Keep Canals Alive literature that we put out, and all the campaigning letters. The Waterways are now snugly in there, which pleased us greatly. And Ivor came back when it was a bit sunnier, and together with Alison, we went and had a meeting with the Chief Exec of Scottish Canals and one or two of the directors. I was delighted to see the bridge has been repaired and actually works now. Here we are at Spears Wharf, not very far from the headquarters of Scottish Canals. We had a very profitable meeting with them. We gave them some idea of what IWA could offer, ways in which IWA could actually help them, practical ways. Worgies could come along with all their kit and could actually help out by putting bywashes into the locks on the western end, which would make the difference between them having to be operated at the moment by Scottish Canals personnel, which has quite a serious cost implication, and boaters, them being safe enough for boaters to operate themselves. Which is one example of the things that we could do. I had a look at Port Dundas, which is just around the corner. It was in there in the Silver Propeller Challenge, but as only about 6 boats have been in there in the last 6 years, this is an edifice that cost 6.3 million to construct. It's a little underused. There are more than challenges there for it to be used, but it certainly should be used. Again, it's something that IWA is looking into. In conclusion, I would say that our campaigning, not the IWA because they're professionals at it, but certainly our campaigning was somewhat random. In fact, it was something of a scatter gun effect. A suck it and see, as the picture suggests. But we were in good company. If you just read the last paragraph by the illustrious David Hutchins, we were in the company of people, a person who was known to say that we were not experts, therefore we did not know what could not be done, which I think drives an awful lot of people in the restoration field. It certainly drove us when we set out to campaign to get the bridges open, to get the Lone Canal operational again, and try and get a working canal that would attract people back to the central belt of Scotland. So the Scottish Waterways for All is a body we've set up. Basically, we've borrowed Waterways for All from IWA. We're very glad to lend it to us. And it's basically an advisory body. We've gone from campaigning now to sitting down with Scottish Canals, offering advice. It's made up of people that've got a very wide skill set, and the advice is based on practical experience. It's an advisory body, as I say. Its KCA has been part for the time being. It's about having a skill set rather than being affiliated to a particular group or organisation. Although that said, all the Waterways organisations are represented there. And we're very aware that the slightest whiff of a need to campaign, KCA will be dusted off and brought out sharpish. So finally, what might be the ways forward? Looking positively now, trying to forget that we've had to do an awful lot of campaigning in the past to restore things that shouldn't really have needed to be restored. Clearly we've got to go in for a bit of consolidation. And that's really the stage we're at now. If it wasn't for coronavirus, the canals, all the canals in Scotland would be open. The Lone Canals have all their bridges operational. We'd have harbour boats whizzing around at the moment, leisure boaters boating around, and be some activity, which I'm afraid to say there isn't at the moment very much. In terms of campaigning, we have a very accessible Parliament. For reasons I'm not quite sure of, but I actually went and had a look around the Parliament building within about a month of moving up to Scotland 12 years ago, and I was very impressed. The word accessible is what jumped out at me straight away. We have a cross-party group, very like the all-party parliamentary group in England. Again, very accessible, and we look at leisure boating and tourism, obviously taking in the broader picture of all the boating around the coasts, as well as the inland boating. And we have a very active petitions committee. And when we felt that things were not as they should be, we took a petition to the petitions committee, and I was incredibly impressed by just how perspicacious they were, just how perceptive they were about boating and what was going on and what was going wrong. They were helped, of course, by a very significant input from IWA again, who put in a 7-page submission. RYA Scotland put in a very useful submission. and they distilled out really the nitty-gritty of some of the problems that beset Scottish canals. And amongst other people who were called to give evidence, of course, the chief exec from Scottish Canals was called to give evidence, and she acquitted herself very well. And I think, to be truthful, she was let off the hook because Scottish Waterways for All had just been formed. And she was able to say that she was now liaising with the boaters, with the customer base, and that she was getting advice from them. Hope that's not too cynical of you. Major changes along the way are that Scottish Canals are no longer a public corporation. Still a Quango, but they're no longer a public corporation, simply because they're not able to earn more than 50% of their income from trading. So they have become, if you like, relegated to a non-departmental government body. The two latest directors to be appointed, replacing two that left at the beginning of the year, have been appointed directly from the civil service. I believe I'm right in saying the posts weren't advertised, but I can't be totally certain of that. It suggests a much tighter and more direct control by government. And the other thing that I think delights us is that infrastructure, operations and estates are now under the same portfolio. A very popular and very effective director, Richard Miller, now looks after them all, and they are a happy mix. I, many years ago, trained as a farm manager. And one of the first questions we were asked to, or told to ask ourselves at the outset, is what business are we in? It's very easy for a farm to have an awful lot of enterprises on the go, but you must decide what business you're actually in. It's unclear what business Scottish Canals were in until very recently. We, for more than 2 years, have been asking for costings for individual enterprises because they've got a lot on the go. We had a look at one, which was the egg shed. There are many, many more out there. And any suggestions for improving Scottish Canal's financial security are just thwarted by a lack of costings for individual enterprises. They are flying blind. And basically, they haven't a clue which enterprises, in financial terms, wash their faces and which ones don't. Still got a very long way to go. But we keep plodding on. It can become very wearing at times, but a lot of people there putting a lot of time and effort into keeping things on the straight and level. We could, of course, take a leaf out of Canal and River Trust's book. We could rebrand. There is a slight problem here in that we haven't got, Scottish Canals haven't got a brand yet. I mentioned to the chief executive now and again, she tells me it's too expensive and one thing and another, but I would like to possibly think about having a brand and rebranding. Because Canal and River Trust rebranded to tap into the health budget. Oh, I don't know why that keeps coming up. And started to pursue well-being. And although there were many cynics out there, and I probably was one of them to start with, I'm totally sold on the idea now. I think it's a very positive way forward. Canals have got an awful lot to offer people, quite apart from floating boats in them. And the well-being idea, I think, is a very, very good one. And we certainly need a lot of it now. Climate change is another way to go. It was Richard Miller, who I've just mentioned, that pointed this out to me. Do we blame climate change, as people tend to every time a waterway gets closed? Or can we actually harness the concept of climate change? Yes, Richard Miller pointed out to me that canals were brilliant for water management, with the one proviso: they needed to be dredged and there needed to be weed control. I feel for this farmer. There must be times when he doesn't know whether he's parking his machinery on the bank or in the canal, because there's more reeds growing along there than I think there is waterway, separating them out. So we need a dredged and well-maintained canal. And that's a budget we should be tapping into now. Climate control, one that the government should be pleased to share with us in order that we move water around, water that wants to move from A to B. I also suggested that training would be a way to go. We need we need a lot of training because we need a lot of jobs done up here, basically. We need a lot of locks built, or lock gates built, I should say, all of which could be done by a training organisation. The Worgies, Waterway Recovery Group, brilliant at training. And we'd like a bit of the training, please. Please, can we have some of this training? Because they would be a very good pump primer to get training going in Scotland. So, IWA advice and practical input. They've offered us the Worgies to come in and do stuff, construct things. They've offered us the help and support and advice from honorary engineers, from planners, from accountants, all of which would be utterly invaluable. We do have a very active Lowland Canal volunteer group. That's them coming back from partying. They probably have been responsible for more that's been done on the Lowland Canals than any other organisation or an individual, plus their work boat. And behind it all, the driving force for the last 40 years is Ronnie Rusak, MBE, justifiably known as Mr. Lowland Canals. He's been the one that has just driven restoration forward on these canals. We should remember that canals are just not for boaters alone. When I started writing the waterway guides, was very boater-centric. Gradually, and it makes commercial sense, I broadened the guides out to include walkers, paddleboarders, canoeists, cyclists. Remember, it's Scottish Waterways for all. And yes, I did have a stand-up paddleboarder come past my boat today. To the point where possibly we might arrive where the critical mass is no longer the motorised boater. Could just be that the clients, for want of a better term, of the canals are people other than boaters, which might be heresy to many people, but it's something to think about in the future. Boaters only earn, Canal and River Trust, something like £22 million a year. Water extraction at about £27 million earns more, for instance. Anyway, all that is way, way above my pay grade. And I'd just like to settle down. The campaigning is very tiring, and live out my days moored at this lovely mooring at Bowling and not wind up like that fella in the picture. That is all I have to say tonight. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
Thank you very much to Jonathan there for an excellent presentation, and as many slides as ever we've had in one of these evening webinars. So thank you, Jonathan.
Pleasure. Thank you.
We've about 10 minutes left, and already there's quite a number of questions have come in, which we'll go through. And if anyone else would like to ask questions, please do write something in the Q&A section. Just press the Q&A button and you'll be able to type in your question, and then I'll read them through to Jonathan. In fact, the first comment the first question is more of a comment, and it says, the author says that they'll not be making their annual trip to the Crinan and Caledonian Canals this month, but they do thank you for the photos and the wonderful memories you brought back this evening. So that's really good, thank you.
Thank you to them.
The next, a real question that says, we regularly take a bloodhound with 2.8 metres draft through the Caledonian Canal, but will we be able to navigate the Crinan Canal in the future years to get to the Clyde Classic Yacht events?
Is this a question about draft or the Crinan in general?
I think it's partly about the draft and partly about the state of the canal.
Right, so this winter Scottish Canals used it to do a lot of underwater surveying of the locks on the Adrishig end of the canal, locks 1 to 8. And they intend to react to what they've seen, replace gates where necessary, and deal with something that was getting to a dire strait. Water's a problem, obviously, on the Crinan Canal, which obviously affects the depth. The depth that the very short top pan can be maintained at tends to fluctuate, particularly in the dry summers. Depth is not showing up as an issue at the moment. It may just have been sort of cloaked by the problems with the locks at the moment, but I'm just delighted to see that something has been done about the locks.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what became of the Scottish IWA?
Right, well, I have to make a point that it had no relationship with the English IWA. And it's way, way before my time, and it's a question I ask, and I talk to ex-members, and it's quite difficult to get an answer to that. But I think, if I'm going to be tactful, it was down to personalities, conflicting personalities, and something that happens with a great number of organisations, they just run out of steam.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully IWA from south of the border has made up for it in recent years. And although we didn't quite get to make a branch, I think IWA's influence has been a valuable contribution to the Scottish canals, as shown by some of the slides you've shown this evening. So it's sad that we lost the old Scottish IWA, but hopefully we found a new way forward that works.
We certainly have, Neil, yes.
The next question is, how many boats are permanently moored on the lowland canals, both residential and non-residential?
That 290 figure that I put on a slide, and it worries us all greatly. And Scottish Canals and ourselves would love to find a solution to this one.
Yes. Do you know how many boats there are that actually sort of move, as opposed to those boats that sit still and don't go anywhere? In other words, is there a real problem with lack of use on the canal?
To be positive, the Living on Water initiative, which I think is probably unique to a navigation authority, has been very effective, and it's got probably 60 or 70 new boats and boaters onto the canal, but they are seen, they're viewed really as somewhere to live, maybe the first rung on the housing ladder. Moving is secondary, and we have initiatives to try and encourage people to move. We do need more movement, and we're certainly working on that. Okay,
thank you. The next questioner says, I suggest that most people involved with the canals in England feel that the change from a government-owned British Waterways to an independent Canal and River Trust has been a benefit. And they ask, when will this change be made in Scotland?
Yeah, many people have asked that question. I agree with the comment that it's a benefit. We're still a quango. We don't even have a Scottish Waterways Trust at the moment as a conduit for grant funding in the way that the Waterways Trust did in England when it was British Waterways. So it's a political question, and I'm not qualified to answer that. But,
okay. Next question really is what options are there to hire on the Edinburgh and Glasgow canals? Where can you hire from, and what's the realistic cruising distances?
Ah, well, that's a nice big one. Scottish Canals now act as franchisees to 3 or 4 powerboat companies. So ABC, Black Prince, for instance, are represented up here. They'll have half a dozen boats up here. Scottish Canals look after them, turn them round, etc., etc. So the opportunities to hire are good once the canals reopen. A typical week's hire for people, they tend to set off, as I mentioned, on a Saturday, up the Falkirk Wheel, along the Union Canal to Edinburgh, turn round, come back down the wheel again, and then go to Glasgow and come back. That's about a week. Where Glasgow isn't available, but when the bridges were closed between Falkirk and Glasgow, people were going down to the Kelpies and back. And the real, what I'd call endists, who must just get to the end of every waterway there is in the country, tend to hire a boat for about 14 days, and they get themselves down to Bowling, they get themselves to the Kelpies, and they go to Glasgow. So those are sort, there is scope to cover all 7 miles of the lowland canals.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is to say that the Kelpies were originally supposed to be designed to move, rocking back and forth to pump water. But what happened to that design, do you know?
Oh, I do know. It went out the window very, very quickly. It's been totally unrealistic. It was it was a pipe dream. It was pie in the sky. It was never going to work. And fortunately, people were brave enough to admit that quite early on.
Okay, excellent. Mystery solved. Next question. Could you explain a little bit more about why narrowboats are not allowed to navigate on the Caledonian Canal?
Yes, a fetch of 22 miles. Easily, it's like being out at sea very often. You can easily get waves of a metre high, and we know that the narrowboats are Class D boats, prevailing winds of up to Beaufort scale, force 9, a sea state of 300 millimetres or 1 foot. Simple.
Okay. Too dangerous.
Yes.
Okay. Next question is, if it's possible to persuade people that everything doesn't have to be ordered from Amazon on the next day, what's the chance of having more canal cargo traffic on the lowland canals? We know there's some commercial traffic on the Caledonian and the Crinan canals, but what about the lowland canals? Is there any opportunities there, or is it a no-hoper?
Well, you saw in one of my pictures, a couple of pictures in fact, an example of a wee bit of freight traffic that we generated from where I'm moored at the moment, Narrowboat Farm, which is, as I say, an organic market garden. We took a load of veg into market in Linlithgow, 2 miles away, on Wee Spark, that replica Clyde Puffer. And that was seen as a sort of pump primer, if you like. We should certainly do it again as often as is possible. Probably didn't mention, but pretty well all the volunteer organisations that were depicted, particularly in those logos, have trip boats. There's a lot of trip boat activity. A lot of people are being introduced to the waterways, sometimes for no expense at all, by the various charitable bodies that are operating there, from the Seagull Trust to the Forth and Clyde Canal Society. It needs someone enterprising, basically, particularly for the Forth and Clyde Canal, which, as I say, is a transit canal, 9 foot deep when it was dug. Yeah, there's definitely the potential there. The union needs dredging a bit, I think, to make it realistic.
Okay, thank you. The next question is the drop lock in West Glasgow still in use?
Yes, because we wouldn't bear to navigate the canal. Anyone who's thinking as part of a restoration scheme of installing a drop lock, I would recommend they had another think. And I think I'd be backed up by quite a few people. Either that or make it simple. Okay. It's a very complex thing. But yeah, it's the only way you're going to get down the western end of the Forth and Clyde and out onto the Clyde.
Okay. Just got time for a couple more questions. Next one is, how do you see the future for Scottish canals? You know, how is it going to work out? Is it secure waterways, or are they threatened?
They're threatened purely on the basis of the state of the track, basically. I showed some pictures that probably demonstrate what I mean. About a year ago, Scottish Canals put together an asset management strategy where they were quite prepared to let the western end of the Forth and Clyde Canal go, in other words, from Glasgow down to Bowling and the Clyde, which of course makes a nonsense of the reason for the canal being restored in the first place, because it's a transit canal. So the asset management strategy was probably a tactic, and probably will work quite well as a tactic, if I'm being cynical, to get more money. The Scottish Government have in the last year been very, very generous with funding, and I hope they'll continue to be so, and that will then go some way to secure the canals.
So it looks like there's a continuing role for IWA in Scotland then.
IWA, Scottish Waterways for All, and possibly Keep Canals Alive will be working their little socks off for well into the future, I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, I think we have to treat that as an optimistic note, the fact that IWA is around and there to do things. We're virtually at an end, and there've been, well, a couple more questions just before, and then we'll have to wrap up. Next one is, the Linlithgow Union Canal Society is 45 years old and has 4 public hire boats and 3 electric hire boats. It's the question just saying, are we regarding this as an amazing volunteer group, as well as having the only canal museum in Scotland?
A wholehearted yes. They're one of several amazing volunteer groups. You know, Lux Reunion, Lowland Canal Volunteer Group, which are an amalgam of all the groups, basically. Volunteering in Scotland, particularly on Lowland Canals, is absolutely phenomenal in terms of what they've achieved and what they'll achieve in the future. A bit of support from IWA, and it's an unstoppable force.
Excellent. Okay. I think almost the final question: how many transits of the Forth and Clyde are there per year? That's complete transits from end to end.
Well, we hear various figures bandied about. I'll settle on about 60 at the moment, but remember, it's rather chicken and egg. If the track was in better condition, we'd get more transits. I would like to see this canal, the Forth and Clyde Canal, as a transit canal being marketed as such, not only in Britain, but further afield in Europe. And I would like to think that RYA Scotland were able to feel confident enough in recommending it to their members as a reliable way of getting from the East Coast to the West Coast. But we've got a bit of way to go yet before that's the case.
Okay, well, thank you, Jonathan. I think you've inspired us and given us a very enjoyable evening and educated us a great deal about what's going on the Waterways of Scotland to help support the association and its work in Scotland. So thank you to Jonathan for the presentation. Thank you to our audience for listening in. If anyone's missed the presentation, no friends would like to see this, we have recorded it and we hope to show it available on YouTube via the IWA website shortly. So thank you very much for everyone else, and we're going to close down now, just a minute or two late, but thank you for all your slides and everything else, Jonathan.